The wind howled like a hungry wolf through the steep gorges of the Norwegian fjords, carrying the salty scent of the raging sea and the harbinger of a relentless winter. Amidst this landscape of brutal beauty, nestled in a cove protected by icy cliffs, lay the village of Ravnsvik, Crow's Nest. It was not a place of peace, but of resistance. Every house, every fishing boat, every shield wielded by its inhabitants bore witness to their constant struggle against the forces of nature and the gulfs that coveted their lands and gold. Yet no external threat seemed as terrifying as the darkness that was beginning to brew within Ravnsvik itself. A shadow with the shape of a man, but the soul of a wolf. This man was Ragnar, once the clan's most revered priest, a man whose wisdom was as profound as their knowledge of ancient rites, and whose spirit burned with a devotion as fierce as the flames of the sacred fire. He was known as the Blood Priest, a title that evoked both respect and a chill, for it was said that his rituals touched the limits of the profane, that his sacrifice went beyond what the gods expected. Ragnar was not a warrior in the traditional sense, but his influence rivaled that of any powerful jarl. His words, whispered in praise of the ancient gods, or intoned in prayers that made the stones tremble, shaped the fate of his people. But something had changed. A veil of thick melancholy, black as the polar night, had covered his once bright eyes. His face, once serene and wise, now contorted into a mask of anguish and dark ambition that not even the most astute seer could decipher. The problem that haunted Ravnsvik was not the hunger that gnawed at their stomachs, nor the cold that froze their bones, but an insidious disease that spread through the souls of his people, a despair born of a losing battle against unseen forces, a sense of abandonment by the very gods who were supposed to protect them. Ragnar himself felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Harvests failed, the seas became barren, and a strange disease, leaving bodies pale and cold as the earth that welcomed them, claimed innocent lives. The once bountiful land now seemed cursed, and its people, once proud and resilient, were beginning to succumb to discouragement. It was in this atmosphere of growing despair that Ragnar made his most drastic decisions. The ancient prophecies, once sources of hope and guidance, became for him a labyrinth of dark omens, whispering of the inevitability of the end. He saw in the weary eyes of his fellow citizens a reflection of his own tormented soul, and the need to act, to break the cycle of misfortune, became an overwhelming compulsion. Yet his search for a solution transcended conventional wisdom. Prayers to benevolent gods, the customary sacrifices of animals and grain, no longer seemed enough. His restless heart yearned for something more, for a more powerful divine intervention, an act that could rewrite the dark fate that befell Ravnsvik. It was on this threshold between devotion and blasphemy, between hope and madness, that Ragnar began to tread a path few would dare even contemplate. He began to revisit the oldest texts, the dusty scrolls containing forbidden rites, the secrets whispered only in the darkest corners of temples, the pacts the gods themselves feared. Deep study revealed passages that spoke of a primordial power, a force of chaos and destruction that resided in the depths of the world itself, an entity as ancient as the gods themselves, but which they had imprisoned to avoid its wrath. This entity, known by the dreaded name of Fenrir, the cosmic wolf, was an omen of Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. But what if, Ragnar wondered, the force the gods feared could be summoned, not for complete destruction, but as a catalyst, a brute force to break the chains of fate that bound Hrafnsvik. What if he could somehow negotiate with this primordial beast, channel its chaotic energy to purify the land and restore the vitality of his people? The idea was audacious, dangerous, almost sacrilegious. But Ragnar saw it not as an act of desperation, but as an act of last hope, a supreme sacrifice of himself, and perhaps of his people, to ensure their survival. He began preparing the rituals, gathering the rare ingredients, chanting the words of power that made the air vibrate with an ancient energy. With each step, he felt the weight of his decision growing, the responsibility of dabbling with cosmic forces weighing on his soul. He knew he was walking a fine line between being the savior of his people and the harbinger of his own destruction. But fear, though present, was eclipsed by determination, by the unshakable belief that this was the only possible path. Hrafnsvik's fate, and perhaps his own spirit, now depended on his ability to confront the deepest darkness of Norse mythology. Amid the biting winds blowing off the sea ice, Jarl Harald, a man whose gray beard bore witness to countless battles, and whose strength seemed to rival that of the mountains, watched Ragnar's growing fervor with suspicion. The Blood Priest, once a pillar of wisdom and faith in Hrafnsvik, seemed to have become an enigma, an oracle whose words now carried the weight of an impending storm. Harald, a pragmatic leader, sensed a shift in the air that wasn't limited to the failing harvests and disease that plagued the village. It was a subtle but palpable disturbance emanating from Ragnar's temple, a dark echo that seemed to penetrate the wooden foundations of their homes and the most resilient hearts of their people. The stories that circulated through the narrow alleys and noisy taverns were of nocturnal rituals, of whispered invocations that made dogs howl and babies cry in their cradles. They spoke of Ragnar, the man who retreated ever further from the sunlight, immersing himself in dark studies, deciphering forgotten runes, and consulting texts that even his elders feared to handle. His rise to the position of Blood Priest had initially been seen as a sign of divine grace upon Hrafnsvik. He possessed a rare eloquence, a deep understanding of the myths that underpinned his culture, and an almost supernatural ability to inspire hope and courage in times of greatest adversity. But this same dedication, this fervor that had once been admired, had now turned into an obsession that left Harald uneasy. Ragnar's dilemma was colossal. He saw his people withering, hope fading like ice under the summer sun, every death, every tear, every look of despair was a nail in the coffin of his soul. His faith in the traditional gods, once unshakable, began to be corroded by doubt. Where were Odin, Thor, and Freya when his people needed them most? Were they deaf to his cries or indifferent to his suffering? This sense of divine abandonment, mixed with his own pain and the urgency to find a solution, pushed him into dangerous territory. He believed he had discovered, between the lines of an ancient manuscript, a forgotten secret, the possibility of a primordial power, older and more volatile than the Aesir themselves, a power of chaos and renewal, dormant in the depths of the Ginnunga Gap, the primordial rift from which the universe emerged. This power was personified by the creature that embodied doom itself, Fenrir, the giant wolf destined to devour Odin at Ragnarok. The idea of summoning such an entity was, for most, an act of extreme madness, a blasphemy that would attract divine wrath. However, for Ragnar, it became the only light in a tunnel of despair. He sought not destruction, but an intervention that could break the cycle of misfortune. He saw in Fenrir not just a monster, but a primal force, a pure energy that, if channeled correctly, could purge the land of its decay and restore its vitality. His weakness lay not in a lack of faith, but perhaps in his own overconfidence, in his inability to accept suffering as part of the natural cycle of life. His strength lay in his intelligence, his esoteric knowledge, and his unwavering determination. But his greatest fear was the loss of control. What would happen if the beast he sought to tame turned against him, against Hrafnsvik? Would he be the hero who saved his people, or the harbinger of their utter annihilation? His spiritual journey, once a path of light and devotion, had become a harrowing descent into the abyss, a confrontation with his own inner demons and the deepest fears of his people. He felt an immense responsibility, the weight of having to make choices that challenged the established order, the very nature of existence. The strength he sought was not a weapon, but a key to a door that, if opened, could free his people from the curse that afflicted them or imprisoned them forever in the clutches of primordial chaos. Ragnar, the blood priest, was about to invoke Fenrir's curse, not out of malice, but out of a desperate love for his people and the land they called home, a love that pushed him to the limits of what was known and bearable. He was about to play a dangerous game with the gods themselves and with the cosmic order, in an attempt to save Hrafnsvik from the darkness that threatened to consume it. The village, once a symbol of resilience, now became a stage for a cosmic drama, where faith, ambition, and despair intertwined in a perilous dance. The air of Hrafnsvik grew heavy, thick with an energy that neither the salt of the sea nor the biting cold could dispel. The inhabitants, once accustomed to the rigors of the north, now felt a different foreboding, an uneasiness that came not from the furies of nature, but from something older, more primordial. In the heart of the village, the temple, once vibrant with chants and golden light, now resounded with the dark echoes of Ragnar's rituals. The torches, fueled by fish fat, cast dancing shadows on the wooden walls, transforming familiar figures into twisted specters. Ragnar, the blood priest, stood at the center of this whirlwind of energy. His figure, once majestic and inspiring, now seemed consumed by an inner force. His eyes, once filled with wisdom, burned with a feverish intensity, as if they had absorbed the flame of the underworld itself. He was no longer dressed in the white robes of purity, but in dark furs and coarse fabrics, adorned with the bones and teeth of unknown creatures, a dark reflection of his new path. His body, once slender and strong, now seemed thinner. His features, more angular, marked by insomnia and the deep concentration required by the rituals he himself had devised. His weakness, his dilemma, lay precisely in his driving force, his desperate love for his people. He saw death stalking their homes, disease stealing the color from their faces, and despair extinguishing the sparkle in their eyes. His inability to accept this decline, his yearning for a quick and definitive solution, pushed him to extremes. He was trapped in a cycle of self-sacrifice, convinced that only an act of overwhelming power could break the curse that had befallen Hrafnsvik. The prophecies, once luminous guides, now became a tangle of dark warnings, and Ragnar interpreted them in light of his own urgency. He delved into forbidden tomes, into scrolls that spoke of primordial entities, of powers the Aesir gods themselves had sealed to protect the order of the cosmos. It was in these ancient texts, written in languages very few could decipher, that he found the key to his despair. Fenrir, the colossal wolf, destined to break free from its chains at Ragnarok and devour Odin himself. The idea of summoning such a creature was, to any sane mind, an act of madness, a blasphemy that would seal the fate of his village. Yet Ragnar saw in it not destruction, but raw power, a force of chaos that could be contained and channeled. He believed that by appeasing or somehow controlling this primordial force, he could purge the land of its sterility and restore the vitality of his people. It was a terrifying gamble, a bargain with his own demise. He knew he was playing with cosmic fire, defying the order established by the gods, and that the consequences could be catastrophic. But the sight of his people wasting away was an unbearable torment, a burden he was willing to bear alone, even if it meant his own damnation. He began preparing the ritual, gathering rare and dangerous ingredients, blood from animals sacrificed on nights of the new moon, earth dug from ancient cemeteries, and a fragment of bone from a wolf killed during the first snowfall of winter. Each element was imbued with a dark meaning, a link to the forces he sought to awaken. The air in the temple became palpable, charged with static electricity, and a low, constant murmur seemed to emanate from the very stones of the altar. The tension was almost unbearable, a prelude to the storm that was about to descend upon Hrafnsvik. Ragnar, on his knees, arms raised toward the dark ceiling, began to chant the ancient words, his deep, husky voice breaking the silence, summoning the strength that lay dormant in the depths of time. His goal was not revenge or glory, but survival, a desperate struggle against an implacable destiny, where the line between savior and destroyer grew dangerously thin. The sky over Hrafnsvik, once a icy, clear blue, was now tinged with an oppressive gray, as if the clouds themselves were weeping. The wind, which had once howled furiously, now moaned in melancholy tones, carrying with it the scent of disturbed earth and something wild and untamable. In the center of this oppressive atmosphere, Hrafnsvik's clan gathered, not in celebration, but in apprehension. The fame of Ragnar the Blood Priest had preceded him. He was a man whose devotion bordered on sainthood, but whose rituals, rumor had it, delved into the depths of mystery and sacrifice. Once a beacon of hope, Ragnar had become an enigmatic figure, marked by a dark determination that hung over him like a shroud. His search for solutions to the growing misfortune that plagued the village, the meager harvests, the barren seas, the diseases that claimed young lives, led him down paths most of his fellow citizens considered forbidden. He was not a warrior with an axe and shield, but a master of ancient words, a connoisseur of the hidden paths that connected the visible world with the invisible. His strength lay not in physical brutality, but in his sharp mind and unshakable faith, a faith that now seemed to have found a new and terrifying purpose. His weakness, or perhaps his greatest strength, was his deep love for his people. He saw the despair in the eyes of the elders, the fear on the cheeks of the children, and his tormented soul could not accept resignation. He believed that the traditional gods, though powerful, had failed to protect Hrafnsvik, or that his people had somehow fallen from grace in his eyes. It was this conviction that led him to investigate the most obscure texts, the scrolls that spoke of primordial powers, that lay dormant even before the creation of the world. He found mention of Fenrir, the colossal wolf, the personification of chaos and destruction, destined to play a crucial role in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. The idea of summoning such an entity was, for most, unthinkable, an act of blasphemy that would bring certain ruin. Yet Ragnar saw in Fenrir not just a destructive beast, but a force of renewal, a raw power capable of breaking the chains of fate that bound his people. He believed that by appeasing or somehow mastering this primordial energy, he could purge the land of its barrenness and reignite life in Hrafnsvík. His journey, however, was not merely a quest for power, but an inner struggle. He struggled with the fear that his ambition, fueled by desperation, might lead him to make an irreparable mistake. What would happen if the wolf he summoned turned against him, against his own village? Would he be the savior who redeemed Hrafnsvík, or the harbinger of its ultimate destruction? His resolve was iron, driven by a vision of a future where his people would prosper again, even if it required unimaginable sacrifice. He prepared the altars with meticulous care, gathering rare herbs that grew only in icy swamps, blood from a trapped boar, and earth from a forgotten tomb where an ancient shaman was said to have been buried with his powers. The atmosphere in the temple grew increasingly dense, charged with a palpable energy. The murmurs of the elders mingled with the howling of the wind, creating a cacophony that foretold cataclysm. Ragnar, clad in dark furs and with his eyes shining with a feverish light, raised his hands toward the somber sky. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, challenging the very limits of the cosmic order. His invocation was not a request, but a demand, an attempt to negotiate with fate, to force the gods and primordial forces to hear the cries of his people. He began to chant the ancient words, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the frigid air. The runes engraved on the temple walls seemed to come to life, pulsing with a faint, almost ghostly light. It was a battle between faith and reason, between tradition and desperate necessity, raging not only in the hearts of Hrafnsvík's people, but in the depths of their priest's soul. Ragnar was about to strike the blow that could save or damn them all. An act of courage and desperation that would echo through the ages, demonstrating the overwhelming power of a leader's love and responsibility, even when faced with the deepest darkness. The ground beneath the feet of the inhabitants of Hrafnsvík trembled, not with the fury of a pitched battle, but with a deep, unsettling, subterranean tremor, as if the land itself were awakening from a 1,000-year slumber. The once turbulent waters of the fjords now seemed to churn unnaturally, forming sinister whirlpools that engulfed the nearest fishing boats. The air was permeated with a metallic stench, the scent of fresh. His investigation led him to the depths of myth, to the best-kept secrets of the Norse pantheon. He discovered the legends of Fenrir, the colossal wolf, son of Loki, destined to break his bonds and devour Odin himself at Ragnarök. The gods, fearing his chaotic power, had bound Fenrir with a magical chain, Gleipnir, woven from the sound of a cat's footsteps, a woman's beard, and the root of a mountain. But Ragnar, in his anguish, saw in these tales not just a prophecy of destruction, but a latent potential. He believed that Fenrir's primordial force, if invoked with reverence and control, could be channeled to purge the land of its sterility, to break the cycle of misfortune that afflicted his people. It was a risky gamble, a bargain with chaos itself and the climax of his quest. He gathered the necessary elements for the ritual: blood from a black raven, soil from the cemetery where the founders of Hrafnsvik lay, and a hair from his own beard, symbolizing his personal sacrifice. In the center of the temple, under the dim light of torches that flickered like tormented souls, Ragnar raised an ancient bronze chalice. The chants emanating from his lips were ancient, dissonant, words that vibrated the air and seemed to awaken something dormant deep within the earth. He was not asking permission from the gods, but confronting them, demanding their attention by invoking a power they themselves feared. The first manifestation of the summoned power was subtle but unmistakable. The ground shook, and a thin crack, like a solidified bolt of lightning, opened in the center of the altar. From the crack, a dull, pulsing red light began to emerge, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The assembled warriors, once so confident in their blades, now felt a primal fear freeze their bones. It was the sensation of standing before something vastly superior, something that transcended human comprehension. Ragnar, however, remained steadfast, his eyes fixed on the crack, his body tense like a bow about to release. He knew this was the crucial moment, the point of no return. He needed to channel that raw energy, bend it to his will, force fate to bend to the needs of his people. His mind was torn between the faith that guided him and the terror that threatened to consume him. The dilemma was clear: maintain control and risk his own soul, or give in to panic and condemn Hrafnsvik to annihilation. With a cry that mingled pain and determination, Ragnar plunged the chalice into the smoking crevice. The dark liquid he collected shimmered with an eerie light. From that moment on, he was no longer just Ragnar the priest. He was the bearer of Fenrir's power, the mediator between the world of men and the abyss of chaos, the man who dared invoke the wolf's curse to save his people. The battle was no longer against hunger or disease, but against the primordial forces that shaped existence itself. An epic struggle where courage, sacrifice, and hope were the only weapons against the impending darkness. Hrafnsvik's fate was now intertwined with the fate of the cosmic wolf, an unholy alliance forged in the heart of despair. The air of Hrafnsvik crackled with raw energy, charged with the foreboding of something monumental. The crack in the temple altar, once a thread of sinister light, now expanded, emitting a blood-red glow that cast dancing, distorted shadows across the apprehensive faces of the assembled warriors and elders. The growl emanating from it was no longer a distant sound, but a deep guttural roar that seemed to come from the very depths of the world itself, resonating in the bones and souls of all present. Ragnar, the blood priest, stood before that portal to the abyss, the chalice still steaming in his hands, the dark liquid pulsing with a life of its own. His figure was now imbued with a terrifying aura of power, his body trembling not with fear, but with the immense energy he was trying to contain and channel. His skin grew paler, almost translucent, and his eyes, once mere reflections of light, now burned with a feverish intensity, like two live coals promising to consume everything around them. This was the climax of his invocation, the moment his audacity met Fenrir's primordial power. His weakness, his profound compassion for the suffering of his people, had brought him to this perilous crossroads. He was not a man seeking destruction, but a desperate leader, willing to risk everything, including his own sanity and soul, to save Hrafnsvik from impending doom. His strength lay in his intelligence, his courage to defy the gods and natural laws, and his unwavering determination to find a solution, even if that solution came from the depths of chaos. The dark liquid in the chalice, a mixture of ancient earth and raven's blood, began to glow with an inner light, reflecting the contortions of the rift. Ragnar slowly raised the chalice, his gaze fixed on the energy emanating from it. He knew this was the moment to act, to take a decisive step that would seal the fate of all. The words of the ancient texts echoed in his mind. The force that binds the wolf is the force that sets it free. He was attempting an impossible balancing act, using the very essence of chaos to impose order. The battle being fought was not just external, but internal. He fought against fear, against the temptation to succumb to the thirst for power that Fenrir offered him, and against the crushing responsibility of being the only one to stop the beast he himself had unchained. Suddenly, an image flashed through his mind, vivid and terrifying. Fenrir himself, colossal, his eyes blazing, his mouth open in a silent roar, his magical chains crackling. But beside him, he also saw his once vibrant village, now gray and desolate, his people wasting away. The duality was palpable, the promise of power and destruction, and the imperative need for salvation. With a cry of pure will blending his voice. With the roar of the rift, Ragnar poured the contents of the chalice onto the bare earth in front of the altar. The dark liquid hissed as it touched the ground, and a wave of red energy expanded, enveloping the entire temple. Shadows danced frantically, and a powerful wind swept through the place, extinguishing the torches and plunging everything into near-total darkness, broken only by the eerie glow of the rift. As the red light faded, the crack in the altar began to close, leaving behind only a shadowy mark on the stone. The oppressive energy gradually subsided, replaced by a heavy silence, fraught with uncertainty. Ragnar fell to his knees, exhausted, but with a gleam of triumph in his eyes. He felt a subtle shift in the air, a newly awakened vitality. The sound of the wind seemed softer, and the very earth beneath his feet seemed to breathe more easily. The ritual had worked somehow. He hadn't released Fenrir to ravage the world, but he had absorbed a fraction of his power, a spark of chaos he hoped to use to reignite life in Hrafsvik. Yet the cost was evident. His skin was now marred with thin red lines, as if pierced by energy bolts, and a deep fatigue seemed to have lodged itself in his bones. He knew he hadn't emerged from this battle unscathed. Fenrir's summoning had left an indelible mark on his soul, a dark link to the primordial power he now wielded. He looked at the warriors, their faces still pale, but now with a spark of hope returning to their eyes. He had succeeded. He had defied fate and emerged victorious, at least for now. Fenrir's curse had not destroyed Hrafnsvik, but had been invoked, and its power had somehow been redirected. This was the climax, the turning point. The fight had been won, but the war for Hrafnsvik's soul was far from over. Ragnar, the blood priest, had proven that even in the depths of darkness, courage and love could find a way, even if that path led across the edge of the abyss. The land, once barren and bleak, began to exude a faint glow, a whisper of life that seemed to reignite beneath Hrafsvik's cold skin. The fjord waters, once turbulent and ominous, now flowed with renewed clarity, reflecting the sky that had slowly abandoned its oppressive hues in favor of a pale, hopeful blue. Ragnar, the blood priest, rose from the temple floor, his body marked by the scars of energy that ran across his skin like frozen lightning. But his spirit, though exhausted, radiated a new strength. He was no longer just a man, but a vessel lit of a primordial power, a spark of the chaos he had dared to summon and somehow tame. The ritual he had performed, a desperate prayer to the most feared entity in the Norse pantheon, Fenrir, had not brought the utter destruction many feared, but rather a transformation. Fenrir's curse, instead of consuming Hrafnsvik, had been redirected, channeled through Ragnar himself, to reignite the vitality of his land and his people. His weakness, his deep empathy, and his unconditional love for his clan, which had pushed him to the brink of sacrilege, had become his greatest strength. He had seen the desolation and despair seeping into the souls of his people, and his inability to accept this decay led him down a dangerous path, one that challenged the gods and the cosmic order itself. His strength lay in his courage to face the unknown, to delve into the depths of myth. Fenrir's invocation was not an act of worship of destruction, but a bargain with primordial forces. Ragnar did not intend to unleash the cosmic wolf to devour the world, but rather to absorb a fraction of its indomitable energy and use it as a catalyst for renewal. He realized that the cycle of misfortune afflicting Hrafnsvik was not divine punishment, but a manifestation of a cosmic imbalance, a sterility that needed to be purged by an equally powerful force. His dilemma was constant, navigating the need to wield this power and the danger of being consumed by it. The scars on his body were a physical reminder of this pact, of the indelible mark Fenrir had left on his soul. He understood that the primordial force he now carried was not just a tool, but a part of himself, a responsibility that would shape the rest of his life. His journey transformed him not only into a stronger leader, but into a living link between the world of men and the mythical realms, a guardian of the thin line that separated order from chaos. He learned that true heroism lies not only in bravery in battle, but in the courage to face one's fears, to defy fate, and to take responsibility for difficult choices, even when the path is uncertain and the cost immense. Hrafnsvik's transformation was visible for all to see. The crops began to sprout with unprecedented vitality. The seas once again filled with fish, and the disease that afflicted the people seemed to vanish like a mist at dawn. Ragnar, the blood priest, had fulfilled his promise, but at a price only he fully understood. He was now the wielder of a power that intrinsically linked him to the essence of the cosmic wolf, a power that, though used for good, carried the shadow of destruction. His fight was over, but his new existence as a guardian of balance was just beginning. The echo of Ragnar's invocation has resounded through the ages, not as a tale of terror, but as a legend of courage and sacrifice. The story of the blood priest who dared to gaze into the abyss and bring back light to his people has become a testament to the strength of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. The icy fjords of Hrafnsvik, once synonymous with desolation, have become a symbol of resilience and renewal. Ragnar, the man marked by the scars of primordial power, has become an archetype, the embodiment of the eternal struggle between order and chaos, between fate and free will. He proved that even in the deepest darkness, hope can be rekindled, that a single individual, driven by love and responsibility, can change the course of history. His weakness, his deep empathy for the suffering of his people, became his greatest strength. the motivation that drove him to defy the gods and embrace the power most feared. He taught that true heroism lies not in the absence of fear, but in the ability to act despite it, to face one's inner demons and cosmic forces with unwavering determination. His story left a lasting legacy, the understanding that power, whether divine or primordial, must be wielded wisely and responsibly, and that the greatest sacrifice is often the one that transforms the individual for the benefit of many. The climax of his journey, the invocation of Fenrir, was not an end, but a new beginning, a cycle of renewal that extended beyond his own lifetime. The energy Ragnar channeled from the cosmic wolf didn't just heal the land. It imbued the very essence of Hrafnsvik, making it a place of unparalleled strength and vitality. Its inhabitants, once oppressed by despair, flourished under Ragnar's legacy, their resilience and courage fueled by the memory of his sacrifice. The story of Ragnar the Blood Priest transcended the borders of his village, traveling across the Nordic winds as a myth, a perennial reminder that even the darkest forces can be tamed by willpower and love. He taught that destiny is not a predetermined path, but a tapestry woven by our choices, and that even in the face of the inevitable, we have the power to shape our own path. His invocation of Fenrir, the very harbinger of Ragnarok, became a symbol of hope, proof that darkness can be contained, and that light can always find a way to penetrate. His story resonates with us today, reminding us of our own ability to face the most daunting challenges, to channel our inner strengths, even the most chaotic, to create a future of hope and renewal. We ask ourselves, at what moments in our own lives have we felt confronted with a dark destiny, and what Fenrir, what primordial power must we summon not to destroy, but to transform? Ragnar's saga is not just a legend of the past. It is a mirror of the present, an invitation to unlock the power that resides within ourselves, and to use it with wisdom and courage, so that the light of hope may always prevail over the shadows of despair. Ragnar's transformation was not merely manifested in the fertility of the land or the health of his people. It reverberated in the very fabric of their cultural identity, in the way the memory of Fenrir, once a harbinger of doom, began to be reinterpreted. For the Norse people, sagas and myths were more than mere stories. They were the pillars that supported their understanding of the world, the compass that guided their actions, and the force that united them. Ragnar's act of invoking Fenrir's chaotic power, rather than dismantling this structure, forced an expansion of their cosmology. Previously, Fenrir was the embodiment of the ultimate threat, the beast whose imprisonment symbolized the gods' struggle to maintain order. Now, after the ritual, the creature also came to represent the latent force of renewal, the capacity for purification that resides in chaos itself. This implied a profound shift in their relationship with fear. The fear of Fenrir, once a paralyzing terror, evolved into a wary respect, a recognition of his duality as both destroyer and regenerator. Consider, for example, how Viking art, once focused on depictions of glorious battles and divine triumphs, began to incorporate more ambiguous elements, figures that suggested the coexistence of light and shadow, order and disorder. Patterns in jewelry and weapons began to feature intricate interweaving that, while evoking beauty and harmony, contained a subtle suggestion of continuous movement, of ceaseless transformation, echoing the unstable energy that Ragnar had tamed. Furthermore, this new perspective influenced religious practice itself. Ragnar's rituals, though successful, were not replicated indiscriminately. Rather, they served as a catalyst for deeper introspection. The people of Hrafnsvík, guided by Ragnar's renewed wisdom, began to question the nature of divine intervention and their own ability to influence the course of fate. Belief came to encompass not only deference to established gods, but also the recognition of primordial forces operating beyond their direct influence. This manifested itself in the creation of new altars, dedicated not to specific deities, but to abstract concepts such as the regenerating shadow or the threat of chaos, where offerings were made with a more nuanced understanding of cosmic balance. A concrete example of this shift can be seen in the way solstitial celebrations were reconfigured. Whereas previously the focus had been on celebrating the victory of light over darkness, now a space was reserved for honoring darkness itself, not as an enemy, but as a necessary force for the complete cycle of life and death, destruction and creation. This new understanding of the Fenrir myth allowed the inhabitants of Hrafnsvík to approach life's challenges with a deeper resilience, accepting that darkness, though fearsome, was an intrinsic part of existence, and that confronting it, when guided by wisdom and courage, could lead to unexpected growth. In contrast, Ragnar's influence on his people was not limited to the spiritual and cultural spheres. It also shaped their approach to governance and conflict resolution, by demonstrating that even the most feared forces could be channeled for the common good. Ragnar instilled in his followers a new confidence in their own ability to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. If a man could negotiate with the very embodiment of doom, what other challenge could be insurmountable for the united community? This pragmatic and bold mindset manifested itself in the way Hrafnsvík began to interact with neighboring clans. Instead of withdrawing or seeking only defense, they became more proactive, offering their wisdom and newfound strength to mediate disputes and assist in times of crisis. Now, when a neighboring community faced a severe famine or an unexplained plague, it was not uncommon for its leaders to seek Ragnar's counsel and the aid of Hrafnsvík's warriors. This approach to exchange and cooperation, fueled by a new interpretation of the Fenrir myth as a force of renewal rather than just annihilation, allowed for the formation of stronger and more lasting alliances. Consider the episode in which the Fjordheim clan, ravaged by a mysterious disease that left their cattle sterile, sought help from Hrafnsvík. Instead of sending only warriors, Ragnar sent a group of healers and sages who, inspired by their own experience with the regenerative power, developed a method of purifying the pastures using herbs and rituals that evoked the duality of chaos and order, ensuring long-term recovery. This innovative approach, centered on a deep understanding of the cyclical forces of nature, demonstrated that Fenrir's lesson was not about taming destruction, but about integrating it into a larger process of renewal. Ancient wisdom, once confined to temple walls and the whispers of elders, now spread throughout villages and hunting lodges, instilling a new approach to the very nature of misfortune. Fenrir's lesson, stripped of its primordial terror and recontextualized as an agent of renewal, allowed the inhabitants of Hrafnsvík to stop fearing the forces of change and instead learn to navigate them. A tangible example of this transition is visible in the way communities began to view plagues that were once seen as divine death sentences. Rather than giving in to despair and futile prayers, the farmers of Hrafnsvík, inspired by Fenrir's dual power, developed techniques of crop rotation and seed hybridization that not only restored the fertility of degraded soil, but also made it more resistant to future diseases. This was not a mere response to a crisis, but a proactive integration of the regenerative capacity of chaos into agriculture. Furthermore, this expanded perspective on primordial forces influenced the way children were educated. Instruction no longer focused solely on legends of heroes and gods who imbued the world with order, but began to include stories that explored the beauty and necessity of the ephemeral, the transitory, stories about the dance of autumn leaves, which fall to nourish the soil for spring's rebirth, or how ice, though dangerous, is essential to the life of the fjords, became integral parts of the children's curriculum. This pedagogy, by normalizing the idea that destruction is often a prelude to creation, instilled in younger generations an intrinsic resilience, an ability to view adversity not as an end, but as an invitation to adaptation and innovation. Now, consider how this new mindset applied in situations of intertribal conflict. Ravensvik's negotiators, rather than simply seeking to impose peace through force, as was common at the time, approached disputes with a deeper understanding of the cyclical nature of life and death, the rise and fall of power. They argued that containing a conflict at all costs could lead to the accumulation of pent-up tensions, which would eventually explode in even more catastrophic ways. Instead, they allowed, in certain cases, brief cycles of controlled conflict, where tempers were expressed in ritualized ways before the real work of reconciliation and mutual construction began. This strategy, though seemingly paradoxical, allowed rivalries to be resolved more sustainably, avoiding future resentment and fostering long-term cooperation. Furthermore, this reinterpretation of mythology had a profound impact on the perception of Ragnar by his own people and neighboring tribes. He ceased to be seen solely as a blood priest, a title fraught with dark and potentially dangerous connotations, and became a guardian of the balance, a title that reflected his new understanding and application of primordial forces. This shift in perception was crucial, as it allowed his power to be accepted and respected not as an inherently destructive force, but as a necessary element for the harmony of the world. This transition to a more holistic view of the universe, where seemingly opposing forces coexist and complement each other, allowed Ravensvik to flourish in an age of uncertainty. The ability to adapt, to see the necessity in change, and to embrace the duality of existence became the hallmark of the clan, a lasting legacy of Ragnar's boldness in confronting the cosmic wolf itself, and finding in it not only the threat, but the promise of a new dawn. Ragnar's story, therefore, teaches us that true wisdom lies in the ability to see beyond the surface, to recognize the interconnectedness of all things, and to embrace the complexity of life, transforming what was once feared into a source of strength and renewal. Ragnar's transformation of the concept of Fenrir had a unique impact on Ravensvik's social structure, especially its approach to resource management and community resilience in the face of environmental adversity. Previously, scarcity was seen as divine punishment or an inevitable consequence of a harsh winter, leading to severe rationing measures and, at times, internal conflicts over limited supplies. However, the new interpretation of Fenrir as a force that, while destructive, carries within it the potential for renewal, incited a completely different mindset. Now, instead of simply hoarding and rationing, the people began to see scarcity, not as an end, but as a stimulus for innovation. Consider, for example, the issue of fishing. Rather than lamenting the dwindling catches in the fjords, The fishermen of Hrafnsvik, inspired by the duality of power Ragnar had invoked, began developing rudimentary aquaculture techniques. They created protected enclosures in calmer waters to cultivate shellfish and seaweed, species that thrived even in less favorable conditions. This was not a mere subsistence alternative, but an active adaptation strategy, a recognition that apparent scarcity could actually be an opportunity to diversify and strengthen their food source. Furthermore, forest and timber resource management underwent a paradigmatic shift. The common practice of extensive logging, which sometimes led to deforestation and soil erosion, was gradually replaced by sustainable forestry methods. The elders, now possessing a wisdom that honored both the creation and destruction inherent in nature, began implementing cycles of selective felling and replanting, ensuring that the death of one tree could pave the way for the growth of many others. This philosophy mirrors the idea that Fenrir's chaos, though seemingly destructive, is a necessary precursor to a new cycle of life. Rather than viewing each felled tree as a permanent loss, they began to view it as part of an ongoing process of regeneration, similar to how Fenrir's primordial energy, once unchained and redirected, could nourish the earth. This proactive approach not only ensured the long-term availability of wood for construction and heating, but also contributed to the preservation of local biodiversity, demonstrating a deeper understanding of ecological interconnectedness. Building on this foundation, the art of war itself in Hrafnsvik began to incorporate nuances of Ragnar's philosophy. Rather than focusing solely on enemy destruction, tactics began to consider the importance of strategic deterrence and post-conflict reconstruction capabilities. Warriors, trained not only for battle, but also for engineering and fortification, began to design defenses that, while robust, could also be quickly adapted for civilian purposes in times of peace. For example, instead of mere palisades, they built defensive structures that, after a successful siege, could be dismantled and transformed into building materials for dwellings or granaries. This strategy, inspired by the duality of Fenrir, demonstrated remarkable pragmatism, recognizing the necessity of war's destructive force, but always with the vision that this energy could be channeled into creation and reconstruction. Thus, the art of war itself became a balancing act, where the ability to inflict damage was intrinsically linked to the ability to repair and rebuild. Another crucial layer that emerged from this new mythical understanding concerns risk management. In the face of natural disasters, floods, avalanches, and storms were previously catastrophic events that often led to the total destruction of settlements. However, after Ragnar's lesson, the people began to view these phenomena not as inevitable catastrophes, but as manifestations of the primordial force of nature. Forces that, while dangerous, also carried the potential for remodeling and rebirth. As a result, they began to develop more flexible and adaptable settlements. Instead of building villages in fixed and vulnerable locations, they began to opt for semi-permanent or mobile structures, especially in high-risk areas. For example, some coastal communities began using elevated foundations and innovative anchoring systems for their homes, allowing the structures to withstand more severe floods or to be dismantled and rebuilt in safer locations with relative ease. This proactive approach, grounded in the acceptance of impermanence and the ability to adapt, transformed vulnerability into resilience, mirroring how Ragnar dealt with Fenrir's chaotic power, not by denying its existence, but by integrating it constructively. As the threads of this saga intertwine in our perception, an emerging pattern reveals itself, not as a mere succession of events, but as a profound resonance that echoes through the ages. Reflecting on this journey thus far, we are compelled to note how ancient narratives, often perceived as relics of a distant past, insist on manifesting themselves in our contemporary consciousness. The search for meaning amidst chaos, the courage to confront the unknown, and the responsibility inherent in power are themes that transcend time and space, finding parallels in the tapestry of human experience. The very nature of force, once seen as an external entity to be dominated or feared, now reveals itself as an intrinsic element in the cycle of existence, whose manifestations, though sometimes overwhelming, contain within them the potential for transformation. As we move toward the conclusion of this exploration, it becomes increasingly clear that the challenges faced by the ancient inhabitants of Hrafnsvik were not singularities of a bygone era, but reflections of universal dilemmas that continue to shape our present. The complex relationship between fate and free will, the struggle for autonomy, and the search for a balance between order and freedom resonate with surprising vividness in our own context. The lessons learned from interacting with primordial forces, from embracing impermanence, and from valuing resilience provide an interpretative framework for our own journey. How ancient communities navigated the tides of uncertainty, adapting to change, and finding new ways to thrive offers a glimpse into what is needed to meet the challenges of our own time. From this convergence of knowledge and experience emerges a deeper understanding of the nature of true strength. It is not simply the ability to overcome external adversity, but the inner ability to integrate the most disparate elements of existence, light and shadow, order and chaos, into a harmonious whole. As we approach the conclusion, the path forward becomes clearer. The accumulated understanding of these ancient narratives points to a wisdom that lies in the acceptance of complexity, the courage to confront the unknown, and the ability to find renewal even in the most profound transformations. The legacy of these stories is not merely a record of the past, but an invitation to reflect on our own humanity and the potential that resides within each of us to shape the future. The saga of Ragnar the Blood Priest and his audacious invocation of Fenrir, the cosmic wolf, transcends the mere narrative of a Viking leader in times of adversity. By delving deeper into this myth, we uncover a universal truth that resonates with the very fiber of our being: the intrinsic interconnection between order and chaos, destruction and creation. The story does not end with the return of prosperity to Hrafnsvik, but rather with the profound lesson that true strength lies not in denying the shadows, but in their acceptance and integration. Ragnar, rather than exiling Fenrir's terrifying power, dared to confront it, understanding that chaotic energy, when understood and channeled wisely, can be a catalyst for renewal. He teaches us that resilience is not built in the absence of challenges, but in the ability to adapt and transform what threatens us into an engine of growth. The echoes of this Norse epic span the millennia, reminding us that the struggle against adversity is a constant part of the human experience. The scars Ragnar bore on his skin were a visible reminder, but also a symbol of inner transformation, of the shaping of his soul by confronting the abyss. He shows us that heroism is not defined by invincibility, but by the courage to embrace one's own vulnerability and use that understanding to inspire and guide. His journey invites us to view the storms in our own lives not as sentences, but as opportunities for learning and adaptation. Hrafnsvik's ability to flourish after summoning Fenrir was no fortuitous miracle, but the result of a profound reorientation of his worldview, an embrace of duality as a driving force rather than a weakness. Thus, the saga compels us to reflect on our own relationship with the chaos in our lives, be it uncertainties of the future, inevitable losses, or internal conflicts. True practice begins now, in the present moment, when we recognize that the strength that resides within us is a reflection of the very nature of the universe, a force that can destroy but also has the power to rebuild. Ragnar's wisdom lies not in taming Fenrir, but in understanding his essence and daring to use it for good, transforming the curse into a silent blessing. The memory of Hrafnsvik, reborn by the power of the cosmic wolf, serves as a beacon, illuminating the path so that through the acceptance of impermanence and the courage to embrace transformation, we can, like the ancient Vikings, find within ourselves the strength to navigate the turbulent waters of existence and emerge, not unscathed, but strengthened and renewed. The story leaves us with the most profound of truths. The strength we seek lies not in avoiding the darkness, but in learning to dance with it, and thus finding the light that emanates from its very essence.